I love to laugh. It's one of my all-time favorite things in the whole world. I love witty humor and clever sarcasm. And I love people who love it too. It's been fun as our kids have gotten older that we can now laugh at things together. There's truly nothing better. My oldest son specifically, as he gets older, we realize that we have the same sense of humor. He's a witty kid, and I love it. Around middle school age, he started asking me about the show The Office. He said that all of his friends at school watched it, and he didn't get their jokes. Now, you have to understand, we've always had some pretty strict rules when it comes to TV and screens. Most of the content out there is not good for any of us to take in, especially kids. A lot of it is like sheep in wolf's clothing. The content seems harmless, but it ultimately desensitizes or normalizes behaviors and beliefs that challenge our Christian foundation. So from the time our kids were born, we set pretty high guardrails. We never had cable, the kids never got their own tablets, and we don't have free access to the internet. We just know how formative this stuff can be. And we believe that the holy, set-apart way to guard our kids is to take this really seriously. So when my son asked if he could watch The Office as a middle schooler, that was a hard no. And thankfully, he really didn't ask again much after that. But then he got into high school, and all the kids at youth group were making jokes from the show. And again, he felt left out. Now I know that I can tend to be a highly guarded parent. And there have been many times in my parenting where I've had to check myself for not being quite so overprotective. And so I thought maybe this was one of those times. I knew that The Office was a funny show, and I knew that my son would love the quirky banter between the characters. I also knew that he was highly sensitive to sexually charged content. I mean, the kid's in high school and he still covers his eyes on any on-screen kiss. So I began to wonder if maybe I was being a little too sensitive. I let my guard down and I let him start watching the show. Almost immediately, our days were filled with jokes from The Office, all sorts of puns, and some were pretty funny. The kid had mastered the humor. We enjoyed laughing together. But then my decision backfired. Our youth pastor sent me a message and asked me to talk to my son about being more respectful during her preaching time. The boys all liked to interact with her when she was preaching, which was fine. But lately, they had started making "that's what she said" jokes a lot while she was preaching. Are you kidding me? I was immediately angry at both my son and myself. I shouldn't have let him start watching that show when he was so young. So later that night, I had a conversation with him. I said, "Kid, it is not appropriate to be making jokes while she's preaching. You need to show more respect than that." And he responded and he said, "Mom, it's not just me. And she jokes with us most of the time. It doesn't bother her." And I said, "That may be so, but do you understand what you're saying? You are literally making sexual innuendos while she is preaching God's word. Do you have any idea how inappropriate that is?" And I just remember his eyes got big and he froze. He had no idea. He was completely mortified. Watching this show had formed him and desensitized him, and he didn't even realize it. Because the fact is, we are formative beings. From the moment we enter into this world, we are learning. We're picking up on cues from all sorts of things around us, learning how to navigate, how to stay safe, how to fit in and to be accepted, to get what we need and what we want. We're watching our parents and those that we're around the most. We're being formed in both concrete teachings like words and colors, but also in all sorts of subconscious influences that are coming at us moment by moment. We pick up on mannerisms and catchphrases and behaviors. Those of us who have raised kids have all experienced that moment when your child does something or says something that you did not teach them, but they clearly picked up from us. Sometimes it's adorable. Other times it's flat out embarrassing. Watching a child grow shows us how clearly formative they are. But guess what? That formation doesn't stop. We continue to be formed by the world around us all throughout our lives, both in concrete and subconscious ways. What we surround ourselves with influences how we think, feel, perceive, and believe, whether we're aware of it or not. James K. Smith, in his book, Imagining the Kingdom, says, "The daily rhythms of our behaviors and actions are driven not primarily by conscious, intentional choices, but by a million unconscious, involuntary prompts that carry their own vision of what we're all about." We are formed by the world around us, day in and day out. The media feeds our politics. Social media breeds our view of one another. Marketing entices our desires. And the things that we read shape our understanding of why and how the world is like it is. This is serious stuff. And if we're not intentional, we will conform to the patterns of this world. We just will. This is why Paul tells us, "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercy of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." Paul acknowledges the very thing that we are looking at this week. We will conform to the world around us if we are not intentionally being transformed by the Spirit. In order to be set apart people who remain rooted in God's truth, who have God's eyes to see people, to keep our soil of our minds and our hearts pure so that we can produce the fruits of the Spirit, we must be allowing God to form us more than the world is. And this is an intentional, consistent, willing pursuit. The enemy is fighting hard to form us into the patterns of this world. So we must understand that the way we fight back cannot be feeble. Luckily, God has given us everything we need to experience the counterforming work that's required. God sent his very own Spirit into each of us who believes, that we may be moved to follow his decrees and to love what God loves. God's very own Spirit will do this transforming work in us, but it requires us to activate it. We must choose to pick up the weapons that we have been given and put them into action. This means we first have to learn what these weapons are. We will never be able to fight off the enemy's forces that are working to form us with tactics that we learn from the world. This is a whole new fight that is done in a very different way. Paul tells the church in Corinth, "We are human, but we don't wage war as humans do. We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments. We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture their rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. And after you have become fully obedient, we will punish everyone who remains disobedient." To stand up to the forces that are working to form us, we have to use God's weapons to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments in our minds. And we do this in two ways: by being set apart from the world and by being set apart to God. We have to guard ourselves and what we're allowing to form us. That means the shows that we watch, the music that we listen to. It means the social media that we scroll through. It means the politics that we follow and the news that we watch. It means the friends we spend time with and the coworkers that we mingle with. In order for the Spirit to do the transforming work in our lives, we have to remove every barrier that is working against the Spirit. Paul tells us in Philippians, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." Anything that is not pure, that is negative, that is hateful, that is materialistic, that is unhealthy in any way, has no place in our holy lives. Not because we're legalistic, but because in order to be holy, we can't keep allowing garbage and poison in. The Spirit will do the transforming work in our hearts and minds, but we must do the due diligence to remove every obstacle that is working against it. We simply can't come to God and ask Him to purify our minds and help us to be more positive and then scroll through content that feeds our negativity. We can't cry out to the Spirit and ask for our anxiety to be taken away and then keep filling our schedules to overflowing, leaving no room for rest or stillness. Remember, everything we do forms us in some way. If there are things in our lives that are forming us away from God, then as the old saying goes, heave ho, gotta go. But then, with our guards up against the external influences, we turn ourselves to God to do the counterforming work. The weapons that God gave us to fight back against the enemy's forming tactics are the spiritual practices of prayer and worship, of Sabbath and community and serving. By turning our hearts to God and giving the Spirit permission to come and purify us, to replace the lies that we have been fed with God's truth, and to take time to meditate on God's beautiful instructions for our lives, we are formed into people who have the mind of Christ, the heart of God, and the sensitivity of the Spirit for this hurting and broken world. These daily practices in our lives help to ensure that we are constantly being counterformed from the influences of the world around us. And instead, we're being shaped into holy people. Doing this will set us apart from the world around us. And it is in this way that we will show the world the godly, good way to live. As you move into your small groups discussion, I encourage you to get honest. This group is the space where you can start to wrestle with some of the things in your life that maybe need to go. If you have relationship with the people in your group already, give them permission to maybe point out things that they see in your life. And then together as a group, spur one another on to press in and allow the Spirit to do this counterforming work. Because if we do, we will truly be purified and made holy to be God's set apart people.